What do you think? How can the industry collaborate to be more effective when it comes to chemistry management?
I think the single most important thing the industry could do is to converge upon one list of chemicals of concern. We have a lot of lists by different organizations and sometimes by different companies, and as a result, the mills don't really have a strong sense of what to do. And the chemical industry itself is not able to develop good alternatives for chemicals of concern. So which chemicals matter the most, I think, is the single most important thing people should agree on first to move ahead in this area.
And who gets to decide? Who's in the position to be most credible to make that decision? What should be on that list?
Well, I think it would be nice to have a group of experts take a look at this using some very simple criteria, which is what are the chemicals of concern based on, let's say, authoritative bodies around the world, and then from there, which ones show up in the textile industry. So I think an expert consultation would be step one, and then a critical mass of progressive brands who want to make change could be the second stop. And the rest of the world could follow them and see how it goes and revise and reflect once they've had some experience.
What role does the ZDHC play in all this? Do you have an opinion there?
So I think ZDHC has created a very good gateway for a lot of information to come in. Their MRSL really needs some work, and they acknowledge that it needs some work. And so I think the challenge is to find a method to upgrade the list in a quick and effective way so that it incorporates chemicals that a number of other experts feel should already be on their MRSL. I think if they were to improve their MRSL, which they could do relatively easily, they have a lot of other tools and cornerstones in place to really provide a very good service to the industry.
So there's a view forming that this circular fashion vision, right, may only fuel more consumption as brands are given somewhat more license to grow if you perhaps take a piece of that vision as the driver. Do you have a view on that?
I definitely have a view on circularity, and I think it comes from being an environmental professional. So, in my line of work, we have some very clear indicators of environmental stress and stressors. So we're interested in things like carbon releases and water usage and water pollution. And the question becomes, would a circular economy reduce those impacts? And frustratingly, those questions haven't really been addressed yet because the circularity movement is young and sort of immature. I think if you take a hard look at it, what you see is if you make things circular, you certainly reduce some of the waste going into landfill, and you reduce some of the impacts associated with manufacturing virgin fiber. But everything in the middle, manufacturing the fiber, knitting it and weaving it, dyeing it and finishing, etc., that all happens again. So it's only at either end of the manufacturing sort of cycle that circularity can help us. So my bottom line is, I think it's going to be helpful, but it is not a panacea. And what it does do, which could cause harm, is to sort of provide a justification for more throughput, more sales, more fast fashion, etc. Those materials which are circular because of their recycled content are actually getting that content from bottles, from plastic bottles, not from clothing. So even today, we're sort of nowhere when it comes to making the fashion industry completely circular. We haven't addressed the waste problem. We may have addressed some of the recycled fiber content, which again, I don't want to say is nothing, but it is a really small piece of the pie of the problems that we're trying to address in terms of the impacts of this industry.
Who should take the biggest responsibility for the impact of textiles on the environment? Who do you think?
Without a doubt in my mind, the responsibility rests with the brands and the retailers. And the reason is this: there's not information for consumers to use in order to decide what to purchase. And so until we get to a point where clothing is labeled the way that food is labeled for organic content or certain ingredients and calories, etc., we absolutely can't expect the consumer to push on this. Brands, on the other hand, have their finger on the button. They can collect the information that they would need to know in order to reduce their impact. And so I think that the responsibility is squarely on their shoulders to make the difference here. But the problem that we have is that where this industry has gone, thanks to globalization, is to countries with governments that lack both the political will or the technical capacity to really oversee this industry. So the dilemma that we have is, whereas government law and regulation would be absolutely the way to go, in this world in 2018 we don't have governments in place able to do that work. And thus it does fall on the shoulders of the private sector, who, by the way, are very functional around the world, to regulate themselves and reduce their impact. They know how to do this. They used to do it right in Europe and the United States, and they really owe it to us to be making their clothing the same way they did when they were more tightly regulated by governments.
One thing you can choose during the next 3 to 5 years, that if you prioritize this, you think it would stimulate great progress when it comes to sustainability in textiles. If you were to pick one thing, what would that be?
Radical transparency is the ticket to ride. It would be transparency on discharges, transparency on energy use, transparency on water use that is reported to the public, and that basically puts the responsibility and the accountability on the facilities that are making our stuff. I think that with that simple public reporting, like we've seen in regulatory situations which have required certain types of public reporting, that level of accountability is good not only just for consumers, but also for the companies themselves, because what you measure, you then actually can manage. And what we see is that in the absence of that transparency and the opacity of these supply chains that even these companies themselves have, very little can really be done.